Authors Over 50, Writing in Life's Sweetest Third. Authors Over 50's weekly podcast celebrates writers and their journeys to publication. Writing after 50 is a whole story on its own, so let's skip to life's sweetest third and talk with authors about their journey from pen to publish. Welcome. I'm Julia Daly, your host, and I invite you to listen to interviews with writers who've achieved their goal of publishing a book just later in life. We've seen award lists for under 30 or under 40, but I've yet to see lists for those who've achieved a significant milestone of their own, launching a new career and publishing their first book after the age of 50. We will hear about these authors' inspirations, struggles, strategies, and the smell of that first book. These writers' journeys inspire me because I'm one of them. My guest today owns Creative Lakes Media, LLC, a freelance writing and book editing services company. She's the author of the novel, The Moments Between Dreams, 5 nonfiction educational books, and is a short story contributor to Minnesota Stories Anthology. She instructs writing craft and completed the Iowa University Mini-MFA Workshop. She splits her time between California and Minnesota with her husband and 2 daughters. Welcome to Authors Over 50, Judith F. Brenner.
Thank you, Julia.
Judith, our opening question on Authors Over 50 is always, what took you so long to write your first book?
Well, that's a good question. I started out my career in journalism and with an English degree, so I always knew I wanted to be a writer, but this book is a tender story, The Moments Between Dreams. It features a child who becomes ill. And I, in my youth, gave back to the Girl Scouts with leadership and chaperoning kids. And I always noticed that when the mothers entered the room to help with, tasks and stuff, I felt like, okay, I could save a life. I got the CPR credentials and that. But there was some dimension that motherhood brought to the table that I really respected. Of course, at the time, I didn't respect my mom. I was just like, I'm a product. It just happened. But so I just felt like I'm not ready to tackle this topic. And the topic comes from my mom being a polio survivor. And so she had always raised me going, you like to write, you should write my story. But I just wasn't ready. And then when I did start to write the story, when I felt like, okay, I'm going to embrace like this topic now, having been trained in the who, what, when, where, why world of journalism, where you just write in a pyramid scheme and the punchline's at the top, a novel's opposite of that. You have to keep the punchline for the end. So I took some writing classes at the Loft in Literary Center in Minneapolis, and that took a couple of years just to take my time with it. And once I had my babies and they were off to school, I had more time to start a freelance business and say, this is the moment, my moment between my dream to write a novel. So it was definitely worth the wait, because I feel that writing is like acting, and that you have to tap into an emotion to put that emotion on the page. And I wasn't ready in my 20s or 30s to tackle this topic. And then I also wanted time to experiment with the voice. People talk about the voice of the novel. So it was worth experimenting with prose before I felt ready to really tackle the novel.
I've interviewed a lot of journalists, and they say the same thing, that writing a novel is a totally different animal from what they completed in their careers.
No doubt.
And I agree also, it takes some of us many years to understand and almost to use writing as therapy, to understand our lives before and to be able to have that hindsight and to be able to put those words and thoughts and emotions on paper.
I agree. It's a therapeutic process, and it also is an imaginative process, because you can make up a fiction world that's unlike yourself, and let your characters dance in it.
That's a great description. And my mother and grandmother both had polio,
Oh,
and that's
yeah.
something.
It is something, and I do find readership, especially in this decade, that it came out, the book, thank goodness I, I finally got off my horse, because I also had that feeling in 2019, boy, like I've been thinking about this book for so long. It's like I could get hit by a bus tomorrow, and this story needs to be told. This was pre-pandemic of COVID, but just the fact that, I watched Rotary International have an end polio campaign globally and almost eradicated it, and then it surged back again. So the polio story, people don't see, we see veterans who have disabilities coming back from the wars and what have you, and then you see polio survivors who are now senior citizens, if not past, and using scooters and leg braces or other abilities and to help them become mobile. And my mom always said when she was raising me, like, you don't know how hard I had it, because kids always complain. But when she started telling me the stories of how hard she had it, and having that empathy for other polio survivors, it's a story I hope people, just recognize how lucky we are to be walking, able, and even if you're not able to be walking, that you have an empowerment to pursue your dreams.
That's so true. And, it's a scary world when we think that we've eradicated all these childhood diseases, but they're making a resurgence in a lot of areas.
Yeah, when my book came out, it was released in May of 22, and in June of 22, polio was discovered in the virus form in London. And then later that summer, it was in New York. And the news media picked up on it, and I'm like, I'm happy, but not happy. Like it made my book more relevant. Like, you should read this to see why people should be vaccinated, because if you want to know what life was like prior to the vaccine, this is what the scare was. And it was very similar to the COVID-19 virus, where nobody knew where it was coming from. Do you touch something? Is it laying on your grocery bag? Is it in the water? And then to tap into, like I said, that fear of mothers, because polio, unlike COVID, like, which discriminated against primarily the seniors, here this was a virus that was targeting children for some reason. So frightening.
It really is. And I just remember asking questions when I was a child of my grandmother because she had that little shrunken leg.
Ah, yep.
Well, Judith, California and Minnesota are very different places to live. Do you feel like you have whiplash when you travel between the two?
I don't, because I give myself time and grace between the transitions, and I go home in between, home being Minneapolis, so that I could just take care of things. And um, but yeah, the I just flew in 2 days ago from Indianapolis, so I was there just eve of the eclipse. But I love that both, where my time is spent, it's always good weather.
Yeah, that's
Through April here is like 70 to 80, and then in Minnesota it gets so beautiful, and you have all the lakes. And I'm a big gardener in Minneapolis. So love my rose gardens and all my perennials. So I get to pursue my tennis and golf hobbies here in California, and then my gardening and other sports there.
the best of both worlds.
It is. It is. I think the beauty of being a writer is you can take your talent, and as an editor as well, my clients are in my laptop and in my mind, on my mind.
Well, speaking of that, is being an editor and writing your own book like a doctor who has to treat herself? Did you learn anything in the process that you can share with your clients?
Absolutely. I have the um, sensitivity of understanding when I am editing a writer, that writers are very vulnerable, and also that I, through my career, have grown thick skin. So I have to remind myself that not all writers have that thick skin. I've been critiqued by editors in New York and with the MFA professors at Iowa University. You have to be ready for criticism, but I felt like you have to give yourself the best product. Your name is going on your book unless you're using a pseudonym. And so that's where I feel like I also have a fault of editing too often my own work, where I'll finish a chapter and then I'll go back. And yes, there's a process of rewriting and rewriting, and you should rewrite. And that's part of self-editing. So for that, I am at a benefit because I know kind of what I'm looking for. But there's also a pain of stop, just free write. Free write, Judy, just go. And I give myself permission, and it's so hard to remind myself it does not have to be perfect on the first draft. You just have to tell the story. And then you go back and go, oh, maybe someone else should say this, or, and play with it. So yeah, it has its both pros and cons, but I feel like it really helps me as an editor be gentle with how an author might receive my comments and just say, this is possible. And I always offer an explanation, which I appreciate when my work's edited. Why is this change important?
Yes, and I have gotten in the habit of trying to force myself to free write because I was like you. I was an English major and I wanted to edit every sentence. Do you think that's the most challenging part of your artistic process, is preventing yourself from self-editing as you go along, or waiting to get more on paper before you start that process?
Yeah, well, I'm on my second book now. So the first book took 5 years, and I wasn't in a hurry for it, so it didn't matter. But yeah, that was too long because I had the whole idea mapped out, but it took too long. So with this book, I am giving myself permission, and actually, writers will have, fellow writers read their work if they're lucky enough to have that community. And so I've got a stack now. I have a whole file folder, and it's like coordinated. So I know like when I'm ready, I'm going back and I'll reread chapter one and go, oh, this is what Jane said, or Joseph said. And do I agree with that change now? And I always look for those opportunities to do it later this time. So that's been a learning process after being a debut author for fiction.
Well, it sounds like your mother was your inspiration for the first book and polio. What was the inspiration for the second, and what is it about?
Yeah. Well, a little change in that my first book, of course, was inspired by my mom, but my grandmother was my hero when I was growing up, and I saw her as the one who empowered my mom to pursue her dreams. So I really felt like I channeled my grandmother's voice in my first book. And then the second book is, again, taking that character Ellie forward as a singer. And so there actually isn't an inspiration in real life for the second book. So in one way, it's a little more difficult because I clearly am making up the story, where the first book channeled the first part of my mom's life. So I had kind of a roadmap of like this, as a journalist, you want to write real life. And so I've been reading memoirs of Joni Mitchell, and I'm not a singer. I do play the keyboard. So I can read sheet music and that, but I'm not a drummer, and I'm featuring a drummer and a singer in the next book. And so I'm really doing some different kind of current research about music, and that's been very inspiring. I'm also tackling, because I think my readers enjoy the backdrop of war. I mean, there's a lot to be said about World War II, and the first book takes place in the 40s in the World War II. So this book is 1966 to 68 during the Vietnam War. So again, just researching that historical fiction, and there are so many inspiring stories of vets and the scares of seeing your son go off being drafted. So I'm tapping into that energy, and it's really fun to like have a following now and just see how we push Ellie into some tricky situations, being a disabled American who's proud, and also seeing her friends being drafted at the same time she's playing in a band for a protest rally in Vietnam. So I've got that kind of balance of her heart torn too. So it's a fun. You have to have complex stories, I think, and that's what keeps me going.
I love when authors have beautiful titles and titles that you can't exactly figure out. What does your title, The Moments Between Dreams, mean?
Yes, it really means that Carol, the protagonist in the moments between dreams, has these dreams for her perfect family with the the white picket fence and just experiencing life. And sometimes the dreams go off the rails, and so that is what I'm trying to convey there is that these are the moments between when you're going to try to pursue your dreams. So as the reader, hopefully, will see she and Ellie have, and even the other characters that you'll meet have these dreams, and it's really about empowerment and courage. And I hope that people feel the mystery of the moments between dreams, that we don't always have to have our life figured out.
It's rare that we do. We have lots of surprises in life.
Mm-hmm.
Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about the passage you've brought to share today and then read so we can hear your tone and voice in the book?
Certainly, yes. So this passage is when Ellie has been diagnosed with polio, and it's not a spoiler because that's on the back of the book. And here the mother is trying to navigate um, the hospital system. And in similar to COVID, I believe, there were you couldn't visit your relatives. The same was true in the polio epidemic, where there's isolation, and once you're out of that contagious ward, then you could have visitors, but it was very restricted. In this scene, I also have the father being drafted into World War II, and he would love to come home and visit his daughter. The U.S. Navy gives Liberty Passes to military people with people who are sick. And so Carol's trying to make sure that Joe can visit when he can, but that's tricky. So he's been denied once and he got quite angry. That's the backdrop. This is Carol talking. I paid more attention to who worked which shifts at the hospital, keeping a log of their names. In April, I brought tulips from my garden for the nurses' station, getting to know a heavyset woman named Margaret, the charge nurse who worked weekends. The next time I saw her, I asked, "Could you use some coffee coupons this month?" "Oh, I get enough free coffee here. Thanks, Mrs. Wozniak. You keep them." "You know my little Ellie is up in the polio ward." "Yes, that cute little girl with the dark wavy hair." "Yes, her dad's in the military, locally assigned at Navy Pier because of her illness. Can you please let him visit Ellie on a Sunday?" "Sorry, Mrs. Wozniak. The rules are here for a reason." Margaret's voice trailed off, working out shift assignments for her staff. She checked her nails after the clipboard snapped at her. Didn't she feel empathy? Maybe she was missing someone too because of the war. It seemed to me these nurses weren't doing much more than moving pillows around. Why not have visitors? Were they hiding something? My mind whirled. I had to be clever. Not detecting any photos of grandkids on her desk area, I noticed her double chin. Sugar had to be the tipping point. "Margaret, if my husband was to come this Sunday, we could be discreet and not tell the world that Children's Memorial had allowed a visitor. I could bring a delicious cheesecake for you." "Shh, keep your voice down." I whispered, "What if Joe wears his navy whites to blend in with the surroundings, uniforms and all? I know Ellie misses him. It's been months. Would morning or afternoon work better? Do you prefer Danish coffee cake or cheesecake?" I tried again. She covered her mouth with a clipboard. "Mrs. Wozniak, you are a clever baker, aren't you? Let's keep this quiet. But yes, your husband can visit on a Sunday, as long as it's when I'm working. We can be discreet. And did I mention prune coffee cake is my favorite?" "Of course, prune it is." How appropriate, I thought, smiling politely, but not too wide. I could feel sweat glistening on my temples. Joe would be pleased. I'd avoid his tirades. Ellie could see her dad. My heart raced to the triumphant beat of my heels clicking a sweet echo down the tile hallway. I pushed open the double doors and let the spring breeze refresh my damp armpits. I drummed a song beat on my thighs while I waited for the bus. I headed straight for the beauty salon to visit my mom and my sister Polly. They could afford the time and had enough money to have their hair styled weekly. I told them my triumphant news. Sunday visits for Joe. I didn't mention my fear of his anger. I begged both of them for a sugar rationing coupon. I can give you an extra, Mom said. She was my rock, always resourceful. Polly picked up the newspaper in the basket by the hairdryers. Did you see this? It's a March of Dimes ad. Stand by him, so he can stand by himself. It showed a somber boy with braces on both legs, leaning on crutches, and portrayed as an appeal for funds. Blue Cross had an ad for insurance on the next page. Benefits up to $6,000 3 years after contracting polio. I thought we could use that insurance. I'm going to apply for that March of Dimes grant and help with the hospital bills, I said, and then I stared in the mirror at my dark circles, this time from lack of sleep.
That's great. You gave us such descriptive time there. I could just see all of that happening. And I certainly remember the March of Dimes and all the work that they did for children.
Yeah, they're featured in the book as well as in the back of the book. I mention a couple of resources for phone numbers and websites that people can refer to.
Well, we writers like to write, and there are a lot of challenges for many who find publicity or don't find publicity to promote their own work. And since you're kind of an expert in that field, I wonder if you have discovered anything that you can share that's worked for you, or maybe something that you've tried that didn't work.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, I should mention that the secondary theme of my book includes red flags for healthy and unhealthy relationships with women and men. And so I would say that whoever your authors are that have a theme for their book, that you can tag into the theme and look for public relations opportunities during, like, there's Cupcake Month or National Brother Sister Month, and so those kind of PR opportunities. With my book, there's a World Polio Day sponsored by Rotary International, and that's in October. And just by coincidence, the domestic violence organization in DC also has a October date of creating domestic violence awareness. So I tapped into those themes with my publicity campaign. And even though I could write a news release, I do lean on experts. And so I hired a publicist for me to help get that story told. And I was happy to see, some results in a local newspaper. Wasn't lucky enough to get to Oprah's book club, or some of the radio TV stations have book club announcers. So I would just be listening yourself to, like, where your community is. I also found that you could market to bookstores if your book's distributed through Ingram, and be a local author in multiple places. So, secret, you're hearing this here. I'm a local author in California. I'm a local author in Minnesota. And that's because I'm a local reader and I support authors in both markets. And so I go to the local bookstores and I hand out bookmarks, and I recommend everyone get a bookmark for their book. I think these are great sales tactics. You can put whatever you want on the back. I happen to have some awards on the back. When I started, this did not have awards and it was too soon, so I wrote the blurbs. I think bookmarks are helpful to hand out to potential readers. Trying to think of what hasn't worked. I think Amazon ads didn't work well for me. I think they're expensive. I believe that I did get hits and I did sell books, but if you look at the cost and value, the ROI didn't make sense for me. However, as a debut author, sometimes you need to put some money in front of your book because you may not have a name or the bylines to support a readership. So that's my advice, is like, do hire a publicist. People know more than we do. And you can do it yourself, but it's so hard.
Those are good tips. And I found the platform avenue was very successful for me because my first book involved adoption. I'm an adopted child from a maternity home in New Orleans, and that was the theme of my book. And it was such an honor to hear from all of the adoption community when they reached out, other adoptees, adoptive parents, birth mothers, and it was so nice to hear their stories, and book clubs as well picked up on those discussions.
Yeah, I found book clubs to be a great opportunity. If I am just in public, I was sharing solar eclipse glasses yesterday with the community in a park, and I said, "Would you like to use my glasses?" And then afterward, I just said, "Do you are you a reader?" And then she said, "Yes." I'm like, "Here's a free bookmark. You may not like it, but it's historical fiction, and you find some." And then if they say they're in a book club, I'm like, I'd be so honored, to talk about it. And when you combine the themes of your personal book, you find like you did with your adoption story, and I find whether it's like an unhealthy love relationship, then people will want to talk about. Domestic violence includes like domestic emotional abuse,
Yeah.
financial abuse, that coercive control of where are you, tracking you. It doesn't have to always be, thank God, a punch in the eye or a visible bruise, but that, look for book clubs that embrace your platform, and because a book may not be a good fit for everybody. And some people will relate to a virus, no matter what the virus, and vaccines. You can have a debate, and it's okay to debate. I'm not one to vaccinate. I am one to vaccinate. So just having a healthy discussion, I think, is so beautiful in book clubs. It doesn't mean they have to agree with every written word I wrote.
It is beautiful to have a nice discussion. In our country right now, we don't seem to be able to do that. So I love that we can in book clubs.
Absolutely.
Were there any specific books or seminars or writing retreats or groups that you can share that improved your writing journey?
Many, all along the way. I think practice is the most important. Write every day. Doesn't mean you have to write for your novel, write in a journal. I like writing poetry and prose and just experiment. I like to write in my journal like a surprise because I don't know the ending of tomorrow's story. I don't know what's going to happen. So it's fun to look back at my journals and read. I also found, like in Minneapolis, the Loft Literary Center is a very good institution, and people do travel. We have an international airport, so that's worthwhile. Of course, Iowa University has advanced planning, novel writing and beginners. In the Palm Springs area, I joined the Palm Springs Writers Guild, and we're helping students. So we're acting as mentors for the youth who want to get into writing. So while I always believe, as you do, I can tell, giving back with this podcast, etc., that if you can mentor a youth on writing, you're actually helping yourself to understand, what you know. It kind of reinforces it when you you don't have to always rely on spell check and grammar.
Yes, and our youth, they can be so inspiring, and their work can be so advanced. You can't believe, what some of these young writers can accomplish.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And just giving everybody a chance and encouragement, it's such a beautiful thing.
What does writing success look like to you personally?
Seeing my book at the airport. And then yesterday, this was humbling, is that here we are with students, and we're helping everyone look at the sun and the moon shadow. And someone came up to me, he's like, I heard you're a writer. I want to meet you. And that was just so flattering. The person I gave the bookmark to came, had friends in the crowd. And so that little bump is such a boost to the ego. And then when you see your book at the library, that was success. I think any debut author should know that a library sale is a win. Even if you donate your book to the library and they can catalog it and people can find it, that's a beautiful thing. So for me, that success of being in libraries, bookstores, the airport, and then just having people come up to you and say, I liked your book. I sent out the newsletter and someone wrote back, I read it, I loved it, I didn't want it to end. That to me is success. And I should actually say, if someone calls a helpline, if they're having trouble, whether it's American Disabilities Act, like your compliance with a curb or a handicap, like there's no knob on the door to pre-open a door for someone in a wheelchair. Those are things that need to be reported. And so if my book helps someone call a hotline or take some action for a social justice issue like that, that's success I don't even have to know about. It doesn't have to be attributed to me. I'm just glad that someone thought about it.
That's so true. And, these books are our legacies to the world, and they're going to far outlive our lifespans. And I just find that, so wonderful to have these out in the world. And, I've revered authors for so long because I'm such a reader. And when we go to these book clubs and they act like a celebrities enter the room, it's just, so self-satisfying.
Yes, I mean that there are, as this writing community gets smaller, everyone can write a book, but then there's some situations where they're like, "How did you do that?"
Yeah. Yes, and those readers can find things in my book that I never really intended, and I'll just think, "Wow, that touched them in a way I never really dreamed possible."
Yeah, I am gonna disclose something. My spouse, it's my book's been out since May of 22. He's just on chapter like 1955. And I'm like, oh my God, he's reading it. And he's asking me questions now like a book club member. And I was like, oh my gosh, like he's really visualizing, what's happening. And that's flattering. Like finally.
It really is, and his respect for you is going to go up tenfold.
Well, I hope. I'm respecting him tenfold for actually reading.
Well, Judith, as always, our last interview question is, our writers over 50 are quite unique. Do you have advice for writers 50 and above?
I do. I would say keep trying to find that quiet time because even over 50, we're quite busy, these individuals, and men and women can find so many distractions. And I know men probably want to cut the grass and get outside and build something, and women too. And I always find, the joke is, well, my house could be cleaner. So I actually advise, like, if you can find a quiet space at a library to get out of your house, away from your phone. I don't connect to Wi-Fi. I've tried to find those places where you can shut off your Wi-Fi, even because things come popping in your computer, and really focus. So if you carve out 2 hours in a week, then at least one of those hours by the time you're in the zone is going to be very productive. So I truly think that. And then I also advise, like, over 50, like, know that we don't know everything. We don't know what we don't know. Hire an editor, even if it's not me. Hire someone to look at your work, and then test your work out with beta readers. Beta readers are your writing friends who are not going to act like your mother and go, I love it, darling. Beautiful. You want to hear, like, what didn't I understand? What was boring? Get that feedback, build your thick skin. You're going to need it. It's a tough world out there.
That's great advice. And I agree. We all need professional editors. You said anybody can write a book, but some of those books should not be published on the internet. We need professional editors. So we thank you for helping us with that craft. And we're excited to now count you among our authors over 50.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us today. Please look for Authors Over 50 every Thursday when we will have conversations with accomplished debut novelists over the age of 50. Please subscribe and share with a friend. And check out my own publication journey after 50 at www.juliadaily, that's DAILY, like dailynewspaper.com. Until next time, keep reading and writing. And remember, it's never too late to fulfill a dream in life's sweetest third.